Mike is going to run a screen share here, if you don't mind, Mike, and we're going to talk through this process. And a little bit of context here. What we do at Black Sheep Global is that every new team member goes through a 90-day process where they are going through various training modules and content that we want our team to be familiar with. We are leveling them up in their different abilities and working with our clients, whether it's doing support messages or actually helping with building processes and automations and things of that nature. But the process itself has only ever really been documented on paper. We've actually never built out a lead simple process for us. And I was like, well, heck, why aren't we doing this in simple? As we are a freaking process company. So anyway, that's what we're going to be doing today, guys. It should be fun, and we're going to let Mike steer as the implementer. We should have fun. So feel free to hop in if you have questions, ideas. We'd love to hear from you guys too. If you've got things that you do in your onboarding process that you think are important or that other people should know about, and feel free to drop them in the chat or just jump in. I'd love to be as interactive as possible. Sound good? Sick. All right, let's do it. Mike, the microphone is yours, sir.
All right, let's hope my microphone's working well. Yeah, so these are the typical questions we ask our clients. So we're going to go through that format as well. So these are questions that we should always keep in mind when we're documenting. We're going to go through the basics. We went through this a little bit last week, but we're going to go into more detail of what kind of questions, what kind of, the whole thought process scenario. Our first one is typically, when does this process start? When should this process start, Ben?
Yeah, so this process should start once we have our new team member and a signed contract. Just like we would for any kind of other onboarding process, right? This is a contractual relationship, so we don't go through the motions of onboarding until we have some type of legal agreement.
All right. Now, let's talk about why we're documenting this process. What's the net gain of us putting this into a system or even just having it on paper?
Yeah, so as with many processes, this one's about error reduction. There are a lot of different things that we have to do to onboard a new team member, not the least of which is just like adding accounts to the 50 different softwares that we use in our business, making sure that our team members have access that they need, as well as creating a clear and concise path for training, right? Making it really easy for that new team member, in this case, Isaac, to have a roadmap to go through as he is learning the new skills that he's developing as he joins our business. The same is true in any business, right? Property management or software company or service company like us. You always want to have a clear path for your team to go through so that as they go along, you can actually measure the levels of success. So that's another key part of the equation here.
All right. You say something that would also help improve is to create a much better team employee experience as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're wanting all of our team members to be super familiar with Lead Simple, so it makes sense to build this in Lead Simple because it's ultimately a really easy process for someone to go through. This isn't going to be like a super conditionally complex, fancy process that needs to be really complicated. But the reality is there's also kind of two sides of this process, right? There's the team member 90-day onboarding, and then there's also the team interactive portion of the process. And then there's also the internal side of the process, the HR side of the process, if you will. The HR side is the setting up all the accounts. The team member side is I've got to go do and complete this training and make sure that I check all these boxes, right? So kind of things happen at once. And we do already have a very simple HR style of onboarding process, but this process is going to be more focused on the training and education side of the equation.
Awesome. All right. Now we've got the why behind it. Let's talk about when does it end. So we want to talk about both the negative outcomes and unsuccessful onboarding and positive outcomes. Obviously, I'd like to talk about the happy stuff first. What's a great outcome for this process?
The great outcome would be a new employee has completed their 90 days of onboarding and is meeting or exceeding the scorecard by which we judge their success.
Okay, awesome. Any other positive outcomes that doesn't tie into this specific scenario? So when we're looking at this, we're looking at the end of the process itself more logistically. So what are the different varying positive outcomes that can happen so we can track, when we had a 90-day onboarding success or when we had a different scenario? What would that look
Yeah.
like if there's one?
I think another potential scenario that could be, because we've seen this happen before, is where we have a new team member who comes in, and then as they are being onboarded and they are learning and developing in the business, we realize they're really not in the right seat. And this is a great person for this team, but they're not necessarily in the right position. There's an excellent book, I can't recall the title, that talks about how your business is like a bus. You have to have all the right people in the right seats on the bus. If you're not in the right seat, that person's not bringing the most value that they could bring to the organization. So I guess to clarify what I'm thinking of here, Mike, maybe another successful outcome could be transition to another role within the company.
I have a quick question. Do these negative and positive outcomes always make it to the actual process, or is this just sort of also maybe sometimes internal, like what is at stake here? Or because sometimes I don't know that it makes sense to add it to the process. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's a great question. It depends. So outcomes exist because we want to have ag data, meaning we want to be able to look at this in the future and say, here's how well we did or how poorly we did. So when I think about what actually belongs in the process, I guess I would want to define how often do these outcomes come about. In this case, an onboarding process for a new team member is not something that's going to happen every week, every month, even necessarily, but probably once, twice, maybe 3 or 4 times a year, depending on the rate of growth that we're running. So to me, at this point in our company's growth, we're not ready to see, or I wouldn't be super worried about having really detailed outcomes. But as we continue to grow, there's probably going to be some revisions here. If we get up to the rate where we're hiring on a more regular basis, I'm really going to care about how well we're doing. And if we're always transitioning people to other roles, that means there's a problem in our screening. And if we end up losing people, maybe there's some type of churn or a negative outcome, then there's probably a different issue that's tied to that. So that's when those extra outcomes are actually going to matter when we care more about measuring them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Awesome.
I'd also like to add that on my side, I always like having an out. So even if the scenario is rare, or even if it maybe only happens once, I like that. I always want to make sure that the process has a conclusion to it. And so when we look at an owner onboarding, for example, there will be various scenarios when we've already signed a contract with a new client and we decide to backtrack on it, right? The property is maybe way more distressed than we thought, or something weird happened. So it's a very rare scenario, but we want an out. We don't want. I don't like building processes where there's only the they're on one way through, and that may not be the right category to end it at. So that's another thing that I thought I'd add there.
Yeah, and just to expound on that for a second, Mike, it's very likely that the majority of the processes will follow the positive outcome path, right? That's what we would hope for. But the reality is that processes don't always work exactly the way that we want. Negative outcomes oftentimes are a little bit more manual, and sometimes they're a little bit more of a checklist. There's less conditional logic and automation magic happening in them. It's really more about categorizing and cleaning things up. The successful outcomes is obviously what we want, but negative outcomes still need to be recognized and built into your process.
Yeah. All right. Speaking of negative outcomes, let's talk about the sad things. What happens when a new employee onboarding doesn't go as we expect it to?
Yeah, so I think there's two potential negative outcomes here. One would be firing, and then another would be churn, right? If someone's proven to not be a good fit, or they have chosen to self-select and no longer stay with us.
Okay. Good. All right. Okay. I think that covers it for outcomes. What happens after this process? So when we talk about what comes next, we're talking about what is the next thing that kicks off. So we're thinking about processes being very siloed in. We want the 90-day plan to be very focused on anything 90-day related. Anything that's not 90-day related, whether it's after or in tangent to it, doesn't belong here. It belongs in a separate process because it's a separate checklist. What happens here then?
Yeah, so my thought, the next process would be a 90-day or a quarterly review, because at the end of that 90 days, we should be hitting that first quarter mark where we'd be doing scorecard reviews and seeing how well is this team member measuring up to the expectations that we have for this job. Are there any course corrects that need to happen? Is there opportunity for growth somewhere? Is this person hitting it out of the park, right? Whatever that is, we want to recognize where we are in relationship to that scorecard. And the idea of a scorecard, guys, is something that you probably have heard of before. This is really popularized by Gino Wickman in the book Traction, which talks about the concept of EOS, or the Entrepreneurial Operating System. And using the scorecard allows us to basically operate the same way that we would when we have a new operating management client. If you think about signing a contract, you're saying we agree on these terms, right? This is the scope of our relationship. And a scorecard is the same thing. It's just an agreement between an employer and an employee. And so here's the scope of our relationship. Here are the expectations that we have for how things are going to work. And just as you would in a management contract, it's important to be specific, but also recognize there's going to be some levels of gray area. So be specific as you can, but also build in some room for interpretation.
It's also a good place for a teammate to give you feedback.
Absolutely.
Most people think it's from a managerial perspective, but it's also a good place to collect feedback. How can you ask questions? How can I be a better manager? Or is there anything that I can do to help you grow in your career path? So it's also, yeah, it's a very great place for a team member to for you to identify. Any team member that's curious about growth is usually the one you want to keep.
Yeah, and just to throw out a little tidbit here, I'm going to quote a buddy of mine, my sales coach. His name is Eric, and Eric gave me some excellent questions for quarterly reviews that I'll share with you guys here. They're really simple. First of all, what's going well for you in both the work and personal context? What are any recent accomplishments or successes, right? Just diving into someone's personal life. What are your challenges, right? Work or personal? Is there anything stopping you from hitting your goals or moving forward? Fourth question would be, what competencies are you focusing on? How are you trying to get better? What are the things that you feel are your weak areas? Are there any things that you want to grow in? And then lastly is exactly what Mike just mentioned. How can I support you better? How can I be a better manager to you? Are there any problems that you're trying to solve that you can't, and you need someone with maybe more authority to get involved and resolve that issue? And then kind of the last thing here is, what should I start? What should I stop? And what should I continue? And we'll share those a little bit later on in written forms so that you guys have those as well. But just some fantastic questions to ask when you're doing those one-to-ones or quarterly reviews.
All right. Ben, is this that comes next for this process? What else would be a potential outcome that we should could kick off from this process?
This is all that's coming to mind at the moment, but if you have an idea or anybody else wants to chime in, I'd love to hear it.
I'll give it a couple seconds before I steal the show.
Wow, that was
Steal
quite
away, man.
stealing the show. Oh my goodness. Mike's about to throw something amazing, guys. What do you got, Mike?
When we think about what comes next, we think about all the possible outcomes as well. So if we do have an employee that's not a good fit or an employee churn, we do have the logistical responsibility of offboarding the employee correctly, right? Make sure we are offboarding all the accounts, make sure we are terminating contract correctly. I'm assuming all that stuff that takes place. I've never onboarded or operated an employee, but I know it. I can assume it's a pain in the butt, and we want to document it so it's not a pain in the butt that's in your head.
Definitely. Yeah, you're 100% correct. And we'd want to capture that in its own separate process, probably.
Yeah. Don't be afraid to use emojis. Don't be afraid to be fun with your process for documentation. This is already a very tedious and slog fest that we tend to do. So make it as fun as you can in however way you can. All right. I think that covers it, unless there's anything else we want to add here. Outside of that, who's involved in this process? And when we talk about who's involved internally, is who has access to your process itself, or who's within your staff that is directly involved with making sure this process goes as effective as it can be.
Yeah, so I would say there's going to be three primary roles in this process. You have your new employee, you have whomever their direct report is, and then whoever is in HR or management who's kind of overseeing the onboarding. And I'm guessing in our scenario, right, we're still a small company, so we're probably going to have several people in some of those roles, right? The direct manager and the HR person are typically going to be the same person. But as we're thinking about building this for the long term, as our company scales and as your company scale, you want to build your processes to future-proof them as much as possible. And while we obviously have to make changes down the road, if you could do some of the construction work now and the development for future building, then that'll save you some time later on.
Awesome. All right. We've got our internal people. Is there anyone external involved? Not every process
Not that I think of. Maybe No, there really wouldn't be. The only other thought here would be for us, we update our attorney and our CPA and bookkeepers so that they're all aware that we have a new person who's going to be on payroll and if there's any other contracts that need review or anything like that. So all of the relevant vendors who provide professional services to us know, hey, the team's growing, a little expansion. We can expect this change to affect taxes next year, or we'll see some additional expenses. So that's what's related to ongoing payroll and things of that nature.
All right, perfect. We're looking at, once we're done with all the kind of bigger section, now we get into the really fun stuff. How do we break down what the process looks like? So we'll take a look at the big things. So Ben, what are like the big buckets that we want to cover in the onboarding before we get to like the nitty gritty of it?
That is an excellent question. So I'm going to refer back to my list here. If you can hang on for a second. I've been thinking and not looking. So let me find my list here.
Prepared with a list. That's cheating, guys.
All right. So if I'm thinking about the biggest categories for this new employee, there is going to be some variables based on the employee role I think we'll need to accommodate for. But in general, our primary offerings as a company surround a couple of specific services. And I think the same would be true for most PMs, right? We offer very specific services and offerings to our clients. So in our case, our primary offerings are around Lead Simple and Zapier. So those are going to be two big categories where I want to make sure that there is lots of educational content that's being consumed, and then plenty of kind of testing and working through of those particular content pieces and making sure that the individual who is joining the company, regardless of their role, has a general understanding of what we do and how we do it. Mike, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, no, I think having the fundamentals down and creating a space for each software would be a pretty good way to look for it. If we were looking at property management, I think if I were to compare it, I would like to know at least the general concept, what each department does.
Sure.
Just so I have some general context before I dive into maybe I'm on the maintenance team or on the leasing team, but I would like to know what other people do, at least at a basic level. So I have a general understanding of property management as a whole if I just never seen property management before.
Yeah, there's actually a really excellent course, let's see if I can find it, which we use internally, put out by, let's see if I can find it here. I think it's a Redbridge. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Got a link for it here somewhere. But yeah, there's an excellent course. It's not cheap. I think it's about $1,500-$1,600. But what we've done is we buy the course one time and then we recycle it through. And as we have new members, we can basically just go through the course again. And that allows us to get more value out of it. Isaac's in the middle of going through some of that material right now. But that Redbridge course gives I would say, a primer on property management. Thanks, Isaac. It talks through all the details of various departments, what it looks like on a practical level to actually do property management. And when we're hiring, everyone is different in terms of what skill sets you're looking for. For us, while we appreciate people having a property management background, that's not necessarily required. There are other skill sets that are the required list. But for you, that might be different. You might want someone who has property management experience, or maybe not, right? Maybe you want someone who you can train fresh with no context on property management or software at all, and then they're just beginning fresh with no biases from previous companies. But yeah, property management section would be fantastic here, Mike.
What do we call this?
Yeah, industry knowledge, industry ed.
All right. I think we talked a little bit somewhere in the middle, and there's no real straightforward path to walk through this, right? There's a lot of stuff in our heads. If we land on it, typically the first stage we usually look at is a setup stage where we're just collecting all the information of, well, who is this employee, what's the role in this scenario, and what education pieces, because that's what all that preset information is going to guide them through the rest of the process. So that's usually how we like to build our initial stages. I don't know if you had something to add to that, Ben.
Yeah, I like that idea. As we're building this company, culture is a really important piece of who we are as a company. So something as simple as making sure that we have each person's birthday documented and we ensure that we're prepared for that when that happens, or work anniversaries are documented, or kids' birthdays, things of that nature. And obviously, we can go crazy there with how much information that we're collecting, but I think that would be worth developing because those are all important milestones in our lives individually. And I think that's something that we should recognize as a company as well. Because ultimately, the companies are made up of people. So yeah, credit card info, sure, let's do it. Social security numbers. Now, obviously, we don't want to get too crazy here. There are some legal thresholds that you want to be careful of. And I think it's important to consider, based on your company values, what are the pieces that are actually important here. So I think that might be something to develop offline because I don't have all the answer on that one, but it's definitely something I'd like to think a little bit more about and put together.
Awesome. All right. Okay, we're setting up a birthday roll, start date, personal, family information. Anything else that should happen in the setup stage outside of documenting new information?
Maybe a confirmation that the new team member has access to all of the appropriate softwares. So as an example, we have the secondary process that I mentioned, kind of HR process, where we're setting up all of the accounts. I want to make sure that the team member acknowledges they have access to everything. So yeah, LastPass, Zapier, Gmail, Notion, Slack, and those are just a few of the ones that we use. There are quite a few others, but a lot of these can be accessed through LastPass. Right? We have shared company passwords, and passwords are something that people don't like to talk about, but there's actually a lot of really easy solutions here just behind the barrier of a few bucks a month for some type of password storage tool. We use LastPass internally. I won't say that I necessarily recommend it. There are a lot of other tools out there, but this is the best one that we've found thus far. And definitely relatively secure. I know they had some data breaches in the past, so again, hence my caution on a recommendation. But I certainly would encourage you to investigate finding some password storage tools because really that just makes life a lot easier. Your team doesn't have to store passwords in spreadsheets or natively on their computer, and then there's less risk and liability for the business owners too, because it's one password to access everything. And if you do have someone who you end up having to let go, you can very easily remove that singular point of access. Now, yes, there's obviously still a theoretical risk here where people could manually copy down passwords and then do all of this. So it's still worth checking those or potentially changing them or just planning what access you give to different people. And that is thankfully where picking your password software comes into play because you have some of those options. You can choose what folders people have access to, what passwords they have the ability to choose, what credit cards they have access to, things of that nature.
Awesome. All right. We've got these accounts. I want to add that we don't have to have all of this set in stone. Like any process, right? We're documenting, we're going to be continuously improving it. It's also a place where the next time you do this, take a recording of how it's done and you'll start adding documentation. So as it goes in phases, you go from documenting to building your first process to refining to adding a lot of educational pieces. I have Leo right here with one of our clients, and our team did a great job of sending over quite a bit of screenshots. So I want to give them a huge shout out. Screenshots and videos on how they're doing their marketing process currently. And so we've been documenting the processes for a while now, and now we're adding the training content in there. So new team members can jump in or existing team members that there's just much going on, they forget how to do something or they're not super clear on it. They're going to be able to go into their processes and be able to do those things really well. And that doesn't happen overnight. That happens. I think we talked about our marketing process a couple months ago. So it's a thing we keep revisiting and it's just continuously evolving and just overall just creating a better experience internally and externally. Yeah. All right. Then we're looking at the more education stages, I think. So yeah, education software for Zapier. If we were to put like 2 to 3 steps in here, what would that look like?
Yeah, so I think we'll give a little bit of a teaser. One of the things that we're working on internally, you guys as members of Processes Made Simple will have beta access to very soon is a Zapier training course, a Zapier specific training course. That's going to be something we're releasing over the next couple of months. Completing that training course will definitely be a big piece of the equation here. It's going to go through a lot of details related to specific actions that need to be learned and really just the basics of how to build automations. The way that we think about that is that there's a number of different levels of automations that you need to learn, kind of a single step automation. Click this and then this things happen. Or I check off a button and 50 different things happen, right? There's my kind of pathing and conditional logic, and there's various levels to that. So that course will have a lot of those details, and that'll be a key part of the education for any new team member, especially someone who's brand new to Zapier.
This is our first semi-public announcement.
I think that is our first semi-public announcement regarding that project.
Yeah, we have to do it.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
please hold us to it, guys. It's gonna be awesome.
Now we're committed. All right. Software education for us will include our Zapier Academy or Zapier training, TBD on the name, I think. But overall, yeah, awesome. That's a great place to start. Software education on Lead Simple. What does this look like?
Yeah, similar. This is more of a future course, not one we're actually working on, but this is going to be another course that we're going to be putting out probably a little bit longer, actually before the end of the year. But we'll be doing something really deep on Lead Simple. But currently, the way that we do this is very simple. Go to the Lead Simple training website and read every piece of documentation that there is. Now, it's kind of an overload because there's a lot of information there, but the information there is amazing. It's super detailed. I was able to contribute to that during the time that I was at Lead Simple, and obviously I did an amazing job. Just kidding. But there is definitely a lot of good stuff there. Videos, breakdowns of the various functions and possibilities in Lead Simple. So we definitely leverage that content. And as you're thinking about what that looks like for you, right? We've got many different companies that are represented here. So you may have an Appfolio training course or a Buildium training course or a Lead Simple training course, right? Maybe in the future you'll be using this future Lead Simple course that we're going to be putting out. But it is important to think about what are the softwares and tools that your new team members are going to be basically living in. Give them as much content as possible so that they can learn. Now, the reality is not everybody learns the same way. So perhaps reading all that content is not necessarily the most effective way to do it, but my goal there is to expose that individual to a lot of different information, hope that some of it sticks, and then also to start including them in practical application of those tools, encouraging them, yeah, I've got a project for you, you need to figure this out. When you don't know what to do, go to the Lead Simple website first and see if you can find a training resource that talks about how to do that. Before maybe you reach out and tap one of your teammates. So it depends a little bit on the specific scenario, but we definitely want to help our team to be independent and to pick up their new skill sets as quickly as possible. And I'm sure you guys have all experienced this at some point. It's super easy to enable your team to be reliant on you. And if you always have the answer to the questions that your team asks, then that means they don't really need anyone but you, which just buttonholes you into being the information provider, which is not a practical way to build a company. So we're definitely trying to train and teach to be someone who can research and find resources and get everything you need.
Awesome. All right. Something I want to walk through, Ben, is we have our setup stage. This is a 90-day onboarding plan. So if we were to look at this from a timeline perspective, when would we expect to have each section done, and how would we go about thinking through that?
Yeah, so I pondered this a little bit, and I'm not 100% sure on the way I want to set it up, but I'll just tell you what's in my head, and we'll see what we decide here. I like the idea of breaking down those 90 days into 3 increments. So we basically have month-long sprints, if you will. And as far as how they are broken down and what content we're working on, I think that's really the key question, because we could certainly deep dive into one particular content group, or things could be a little bit more scattered where it's okay, this month you're focusing on the 101 level of Zapier and Lead Simple and going through the basics of the property management training academy. So that's the way I'm inclined to go. I don't love the idea of just throwing a whole bunch of content on one subject for an entire month, but would be open to hear y'all's thoughts. If anybody has experience with this and how you do your training, I'd definitely be curious to hear it. And if no one has anything to say, that's okay too. But yeah, I'm definitely inclined to mix things a little bit so it's not just one subject matter per month.
Gotcha. I agree. I think the nature of like things like Zapier and Lead Simple, at least for our business, the way we handle it, is they're very intermingled. So it would feel very anemic to educate people on Zapier and not having full knowledge on what they're connecting to. Yeah, we can talk about this. One way we document, or at least I like to document a lot, is when I don't want to interfere with the actual process flow and I'm adding notes, I like to add comments into here, right? So it gives me a second view of like why this decision was made or additional context as to why that step was added. So if on like a very recent one I can think of, about that we decide whether it's happening from an evictions process or not, and there's a specific step in place to do like a takeover. I can leave a comment here of this step happens only if we did a sit out. And so I can make a comment of that. So when I'm building it in my software in Lead Simple, I can make sure I'm including the logic in there, but I'm also not just creating a huge wave of notes that become unreadable for the actual flow of the process. Again, just the way I think about it, there's no one right way to skin that. Ben, anything else we'd like to add in here?
There's also some other educational materials we use, and I'll throw a couple of book recommendations out here. These are books I would recommend to anyone, but ones that are on our shortlist. Because we are a company that runs on EOS, we do reference a book called What the Heck is EOS, which is targeted towards employees of companies who are new to EOS and don't necessarily know the content. And then a second book that we have is the Checklist Manifesto. That's really required reading for anybody who works at Black Sheep Global, but definitely one I would encourage any members of Processes Made Simple to pick up. And if you do come to a conference where we are located or where we are having a booth, stop by and I will give you a copy, a physical copy. We've got some hardback copies that we love to give out to you, but they're relatively economical. You can snag them pretty much anywhere books are sold, but definitely on Amazon, and just fantastic reads.
Yeah. At our booth, you get a really cool metal bookmark, though.
That's true. That's true. You won't get that from Amazon.
Yeah. All right.
Okay, Francisco, awesome question. Let's see. Educating on company policy. Yeah, I love that. Okay, so for us, and because this call is all about Black Sheep Global, no, I'm kidding. I think this is a very relevant question. Us internally, our policies have not been super developed. That's a project that I'm working on for this year, and I'm trying to finish by the end of 2024. Like having our processes really well documented. I think some maybe more internally related processes could definitely live here. Like you mentioned, time off policies, holiday policies. How do we handle employee outages? More operational policies, I would probably be less likely to include those here, and I would be more likely to include those in the processes themselves. So my general idea here is that it's best to have kind of a company wiki where all of your policies live, but to set up that wiki in a software so that you can link it to the processes where that policy matters. The reality is, as any company, but property management especially, there's so many different policies. It is incredible. I have a friend, Tony Klein, who works to help you develop your company policies, and he shared a document with me. I think it's like 150 pages of policy that he sees commonly used in property management companies, and it's incredible. It's massive. So having a document that is thorough is definitely a key part of continuing to operate any company. But I think it might be a little bit overwhelming for this point of the onboarding. So I guess I'd keep that more focused on kind of employee HR related things and kind of how to interact with the team. And what I would include here, just to bounce on your question for a minute, and might this be something to add, is a detailed review of company mission and company values, right? When you hire someone, it's really important to hire in alignment with your core values and your mission, and ensuring that that individual is on board with and ready to chase after those goals. But during the hiring process, it may be a more high-level review. You might not get into all the details of why this is what we believe, this is why we do things the way that we do, and I think that's something that could be really valuable during this portion of the onboarding.
Awesome. All right. This reminds me of just like any person in anywhere, owner education is super important. Tenant education is super important. Why employee education on how the company runs things and what's valuable. It's also equally as important for them as well. I feel like it's all a part of that same category of making the onboarding experience as educational and as and with the objective of like reducing as much friction and as many added questions as possible, just by being over informative in a nice, healthy way to look at stuff right now. That wall of
Yeah,
five.
and I think just thinking out loud, Mike, I think a cool thing that we could do here is incorporate that whole idea that we've talked about for tenant or owner universities and just having a new team member university where we go through whatever those key HR policies are and detailed review or maybe even a video regarding mission and values and what we're trying to do at BSG. And I think that, yeah, would be an excellent spot to leverage Jotform because then you can build in a little quiz as you go along, right? And get interactive and something that's not just boring and soulless, but rather something that actually has life and meaning to it.
Awesome. All right. I think what's left here is our wrap-up stage. So just like we have our setup stage where we're prepping everything, we also typically like to have a wrap-up stage of just making sure everything's tied up with a nice bow and we're routing it to the correct outcome. What does that look like, Ben?
I think let's see. You know what? One of the things that's important at BSG is making sure that everyone feels like they're a part of the team. I am working on making sure that each team member has merch. And Isaac, I'm not sure how we're going to get it to you yet, but we're going to figure out a way to get you a Black Sheep Global t-shirt because that's a small and important part of who we are. It's our uniform, for lack of a better way of saying it. There's an affiliation that goes with that, right? When you see someone in a uniform, there's a little bit of extra trust. When we go to company events or to say a national event like an ARPM conference, we want to show up in our uniform, right? We want people to recognize who we are or what team we're a part of. So that's something I want to include in kind of a wrap up. And the reality is at the end of this is where we know, hey, this person is sticking around, right? It's been 90 days. They're invested. We're invested. We're all moving forward and we're glad to have this person stay on board. I think, gosh, what else would be here? Yeah, kick off quarterly reviews. I think it could be interesting to, I'm just riffing a little bit here. This isn't something we currently do, but I think it would be cool actually to steal a little idea from Isaac. Isaac, can you hop in for a second here and tell us about I think you called it your academic growth
Oh
plan?
yeah. Yeah, I call it my academic path. So like
Kind of that.
by the end of the year, I plan the next year, and I like one part that I plan ahead is things I would like to learn and make sure that those are aligned with my professional side too. So in this case, for example, I would like to know what things I can learn in order to contribute to Black Sheep Global. So I say, okay, I will learn. It will be good to learn about this. So that's what I personally do, and then I start like working on some free resources that I can get to in order to learn more about those topics in general, and then also some paid courses and things like those. Nowadays, there are a lot of things you can learn like for free just going on YouTube. There are a lot of things you can just get from there. But there are other paid courses that I might be enrolled in. So
Yeah,
yeah, that's
definitely.
generally speaking what I do.
That's great, Isaac. Thanks for expanding on that for a second. Yeah, I think a professional growth plan or an academic growth plan, whatever we want to call that, I think that's an excellent piece of a final stage here where we just determine what's the trajectory, right? 90 days in, we should know pretty well where that team member is going to, certainly where they're going to be for the next year in the organization. I think we should also be setting a really clear agenda about where can you go? While yes, we are a small company and most property management businesses are too, we want to create opportunities. We want people to have the ability to stay within the company and to grow and expand and make more and do more and have more opportunities and just to give them the most that we can for the short time that we get to work together. Because the reality is, hey, life is short. We all get a limited time here. So let's make the most of it while we're here, and being able to grow and learn and enjoy that time that we share is definitely a key piece. I think we should definitely include that.
Yeah, and if you allow me, Ben, like there is
Absolutely.
one thing I noticed in other places I worked at, like there are sometimes a point where the company wants to train employees on whatever topic comes to their heads, but like training sessions on things that they think could be relevant for the team members. But if I personally think that if that is not aligned with the goals of the company, sometimes it doesn't go very well, right? So sometimes it's good to what I've seen, right? It's great to have, yeah, okay, we have the plan, the yearly plan of the company, know that it will be great that people could be trained on these aspects, and they go into that route.
Yeah, okay. So what I'm hearing there, and tell me if this is right, is having generic training for your entire company on one particular subject isn't necessarily helpful, and that it would be better to customize your training based on that professional growth plan.
Yeah, I think like anything that gets that the company like gives us training should be aligned with the goals of the company and the needs of the company. Of course, if the company needs, right, team players to be like team members to be really experts on Google Suite, so then it will be important to start training them on that.
Definitely.
We know that, of course, that it's important that everybody like understands those tools, but it would be great that just to match that with what the company is actually looking for in their plan. Right?
Yeah, makes sense. I like it. Good deal.
All right.
I think we're coming near the end of our time, so let's see if we can wrap this up, Mike. Anything else that we want to cover here for the worksheet?
I think this is enough for me to start building our first skeleton for our new employee process. And yeah, I think we're good. Next thing, we're going to build it out. Ideally, what we do then is we connect again with the team after the skeleton has been built out, where we demo it, we look through it, and we have a collective feedback. So Chris, Ben, myself, Isaac, Caitlin come together and look at it and say, what did we miss? What can we add to it? Is it built the right way? Is it flowing the right way? We test it out, and then we start refining it, and we add more things as new things pop up. And then we get to the really fun part where we look at how to automate it so no one has to do anything, and this process runs by itself. Robots take over.
That's right. That's right. The robot in chief. All right, guys, we'll go ahead and wrap things up there.